I will try and share my screen. Okay. Is it appearing as the right thing?
It's appearing, but not as the share. But
Yeah.
yes, we could. It takes a minute. Yes, it is correct now. Yes.
Okay. So thank you all for joining me and coming to my presentation. I know there were a ton of cool subjects, but thank you for picking mine, Dismantling Colonization in Schools. And so a little bit about me. My name is Isaac Dotson. I'm a 12th grader at Roosevelt, and my Catalyst course this year, which is the course we take at the beginning of the semester, was called Building an Empire, the Assyrian Way, which started me on my strange path towards decolonization. And I'll show you how I got there, but it was a bit of a whirlwind. So first of all, I've always been a history nerd. I love hearing weird stories and mysteries about people and places that have come before me. Specifically, I've always been really interested in cultures that I didn't get to learn about in school. And I began to think, well, why don't I hear about more cultures in school? And why are the achievements, cultures, and peoples we do hear about in school mostly white European men? So for my Catalyst course, I needed something new, a story of Black or brown excellence that could prove as a shining example of the dangers of Eurocentricity. And oddly enough, I found that in Building an Empire, the Assyrian Way, a course that focused on the world's first empire that popped up around 3,000 years ago in what is now northern Iraq, as you can see in the map. As I progressed through the course, I was indeed fascinated by the achievements of these ancient peoples, such as the way they built the world's largest library or their advanced postal system. But I began to focus more on the question of why I had never heard of the Assyrian Empire before, and the larger implications of the Assyrian exclusion from most North American school curricula. And the answer, as I soon found out, was Eurocentricity, a concept well explained by Warwick Duncan of the Journal of Contemporary Issues in Education Research, with Duncan stating that Eurocentrism is the implicit assumption that all relevant modern concepts, practices, technologies, and capacities are essentially European. Once I understood that I had not heard about the Assyrian Empire because the curriculums of my upbringing were mainly focused on the European cultures and its contributions to the world, I knew I had to research how to reform this bias system. And this research path led me to the conclusion that decolonizing North American school curricula is not only feasible, but necessary. And I focused here mainly on North American schooling systems because that's where most of my research on the topic led me, and that's where most of the research lies. Also, it's applicable to me since I am indeed in a North American school system. Sorry, I can't see if someone has their mic on, but sometimes it causes, I don't even know, echoes. So if you could turn that off, that would be awesome. But before I dive into the topic, I find it important to discuss why I chose education at all. And that's because I believe education to be one of the most influential aspects for a person's life. The values, customs, and information handed down to us when we're young shapes us into the people we are today. However, it's not just me that believes in the power of education to shape a life. Quantifiable data for the role that education plays in directing someone's life comes from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And as you all can see, as education levels rise, unemployment rates drop and salaries increase. So it can be established that education is important for people's well-being and success. Now that that fact is known, the question becomes, why doesn't everyone have a college degree? And while there are a lot of answers to this question, and it is very complex, the data from the National Center for Education Statistics suggests that one component has to do with race and racial oppression. As you all can see, the Black and Hispanic and Indigenous populations have some of the lowest high school graduation rates and college degree attainment rates. Obviously, this does not mean that people are less intellectually capable based on race. It has more to do with the system and power and the way that it affects BIPOC, Black, Indigenous people of color. One explanation for the data can come from the simple fact that the education curricula of students of color are, the education curricula students of color are subjected to at public schools was not built for them. It was built by white people for white people. And this is what is meant by colonization in schools. Colonization permeates our schools, which celebrate Christopher Columbus, breeze over slavery in a week, and sum up all of North American indigenous life in about a day's learning. In this sense, colonization and Eurocentricity are one and the same for the education systems in the West, because white people were and are the colonizers who killed in the name of the government and covered up their crimes in history books. So why would a BIPOC, Black Indigenous person of color, want to attend an institution that invalidates their history and props up European people and knowledge as the most important in the world? On top of that, BIPOC have been historically marginalized, redlined, and kept from participating in democracy. So for many BIPOC, college is just an expensive dream. But don't take the impacts of Eurocentric colonizer education from me. Take it from people who are actually impacted by the systems. The first powerful source I looked into for the effects of Eurocentric curricula was a book written in 2013 by proud Mi'kmaq tribe member Marie Baptiste, who is now also a college professor, called Decolonizing Education, Nourishing the Learning Spirit. And this book provided in-depth commentary on the necessity of decolonizing education for Native Canadians as much as white Canadians. I could do an entire 20 minutes on this book alone, but some of Batiste's key ideas here were that Eurocentric curricula spark internal warfare in every Indigenous student subjugated to them, because the curricula invalidates the knowledge and validity of Indigenous cultures by excluding them from being taught. If you don't learn about something, you automatically assume it's not important enough for you to know. And that creates a strange duality within Indigenous students where they go home and they're taught that their culture is the most superior in the world and the one that they should be listening to because it's the one that gave rise to their existence. And then they go to school and they're taught that this culture isn't even worth knowing about. And so this is the warfare that is sparked in many Indigenous youth at public schools. Secondly, the Canadian school system teaches white students to feel superior to Indigenous students because Indigenous history and culture is held to a singular idea and narrative, leaving no room for Indigenous peoples to be viewed as nuanced, ever-evolving people. And I know for a fact that the American education system does this as well, because the evolution of First Nation culture is not tracked. It's kind of assumed that their culture stopped evolving when they were subjected to genocide at the expansion of Manifest Destiny in the 1860s. And that's just not true. First Nation people have and always will be here in this country, and they have also been evolving. Of course, they're well-rounded, nuanced people. They're human. But the holding of them to a singular idea dehumanizes them and holds them to this one unrealistic idea. And finally, validating and teaching Indigenous history in public schools will nourish the learning spirit in Indigenous students because people will always want to learn about things that pertain to their life. Thus, diversifying Canadian school curricula will increase Indigenous graduation rates, which at the moment are 42% compared to the normal Canadian 78%. And I mean, I think it's obvious that that 42% comes from a lack of their culture being taught at school and this internal warfare that it sparks. So next, this invalidation of Indigenous culture that we see in schools by the mere fact that it's not taught causes us to miss out on all kinds of knowledge and concepts, philosophies, and even religions. One that I thought was very important is gender fluid and gender queer people would feel more empowered and validated if knowledge of First Nation two-spiritedness was commonplace in school, and hatred against the LGBTQ plus community would fall in general. For those of you that don't know, two-spirited individuals are people who have both masculine and feminine spirits within them, a strikingly similar concept to that of gender fluid people. Traditionally, two-spirited people were hailed as holy individuals in First Nation societies because they possessed the knowledge of male and female existence, giving them an extraordinary level of well-roundedness and perspective on the world. I find this concept very interesting because every member of the LGBTQ community, all of the aspects of that community are persecuted, but in the indigenous societies that came before us, they were hailed as holy. And so I think that if that was taught, it would empower a lot of LGBTQ plus youth. So that was just an example of things that we're missing out on. And a powerful quote that I found from Batiste was that the modern educational system was created to maintain the identity, language, and culture of a colonial society while ignoring the need to decolonize. So this colonial education system and curricula not only create internal conflict for BIPOC and discourage them from participating in academia, but it leads to attitudes, beliefs, and perspectives of the world that benefit colonizer agendas. In essence, it colonizes students' minds, impacting the way they see the world and even themselves. This colonialism of the mind is indeed purposeful and very sinister, as it internalizes bigoted ideals into the mind of BIPOC youth and makes them find self-worth in becoming individuals who are productive members of the colony. Summarized best by Ethiopian writer Begna Dugasa, when she said, individuals were molded enough and demonstrated affinity with the colonizers, they were recognized as having reached the highest level of being. And that picture I just thought was a good visual representation of how the education system transports people into this highest level of being. And it might be hard to discern, or it might not be to who the colonizers in America are. It's white people. Thus, in this sense, decolonization is a facet of dismantling white supremacy, also known as Eurocentricity. In our schools, this quote-unquote highest level of being that is projected onto students is a complicit white acting student, because the idea that white people have always had the best ideas, inventions, art, and religions is enforced daily in the classroom when we learn about ancient Greece instead of ancient Assyria, or the life of Jesus instead of that of Lao Tzu, or the simple fact that the foundational structure of most history classes is centered around Europe. But how do we get students, BIPOC and white alike, to understand that cultures around the world have made important contributions to human progression, or that a toxic white male isn't the person they should aspire to be? The answer is decolonization. But what exactly is that? The dictionary defines decolonization as a taking away of the colonial, but as decolonization pertains to North American education, it can be thought of as a shift in perspective away from the supremacy of Europe and a validating of non-European knowledge, culture, and belief. And as I was looking into my research, I found concrete steps that have been taken in the real world to decolonize curricula, and they are teaching historiography, actually diversifying teaching materials, involving students in curriculum creation, moving exams away from simple memorization of information, and making sure students understand their value. To begin with, historiography and diversity. Historiography is the practice of teaching students how to analyze multiple sources to discern the truth of a situation. It is, in essence, teaching students how to be historians, so they can work out the nuance of history and avoid being fed a set narrative about the world. Diversifying teaching and reading materials means shifting the contents of a course away from Europe and making sure students hear marginalized people's perspectives. Both of these are extremely important in developing students' passions for the world outside of school. Historiography can provide sort of a circumvention to the oppression within a school system because it teaches students how to discern the truth of a historical event, not necessarily the story told to them by a white person. And diversifying teaching materials helps students see that people other than white people have amazing ideas that deserve to be taught. Great examples of this come from my AP Lit class, where we read Woman Warrior, a book about a Chinese immigrant, and The Color Purple, obviously, which is a classic. But I would say on the whole, most of my, definitely most of my history classes and most of my English classes have been focused around white authors. So next, we have valuing students, curriculum creation, and exam renovation. So first of all, it is absolutely imperative that teachers try to involve every student in the classroom. When students get some academic success, their curiosity grows. Furthermore, teachers should select typically marginalized students to be leaders so these students know their worth. Empowering students in the classroom with the social aspect of leadership and group projects is an amazing way to start. And honestly, just having posters around the classroom too that can say that you are valued helps empower BIPOC youth. Next, involving students in the creation of course curriculum is imperative. Students know what they want and or need to know about the world, and the curriculum building experience is valuable for the students. Not to mention, students are sick of being force-fed antiquated histories and unimportant information. When you involve students in the creation of curriculum, you're involving the people in sort of a democratic process in the way that they want to learn. And this is imperative for knowing non-Eurocentric history courses and implementing them into schools. And finally, renovating exams looks like moving away from standardized testing, which is often Eurocentric and contains the philosophies and beliefs of rigid Eurocentricity, and moving into experiential learning. Getting students to understand how knowledge can be applied to the real world is essential to developing individuality in students and their curiosity for the world. But does any of this work? Real-world implementation is showing us that these methods do in fact work for dismantling the evils of colonization in our schools. And this implementation can be seen in the new DMPS history classes and in the KIPP preparatory school in Harlem. So first of all, KIPP. KIPP is a prep private school that started in Harlem, but has now popped up programs all over the country, and it offers students a new way to learn. KIPP utilizes Afrocentric curricula to engage students in a unique learning experience. KIPP is, however, not anti-European or white. It just centers the curriculum around Afrocentricity because students in KIPP are most often BIPOC. KIPP teaches about the philosophies, religions, achievements, and cultures of African peoples in their diaspora while offering experiential learning and almost year-round schooling. And the result of this Afrocentricity and a decolonized education is that KIPP sees much higher scores on testing for their Black students, suggesting that students are more invested when the material relates to them and when the material is not Eurocentric. Sorry for the quality of this picture, but you can see here clearly that the KIPP DC public schools outscore the DC public schools, the public charter schools, and especially in the at-risk performance category. KIPP does better to take kids who are maybe going down a dark path in life and turn them around by getting them interested and curious in a content that actually relates to them. The second example is DMPS's new history classes. This year, several students, Gabby Hort and Georgia Page mostly, which I think are in this meeting, got together to create new elective history courses that will focus on histories not told by our existing history classes. These new courses are LGBTQ+ history, Chicano history, Latinx history, African history, African American history, and Asian and Pacific Islander history. These courses work to highlight how quickly students can affect change and create their own curricula. This small group of students, unpaid, took the initiative and created 7 classes. That's almost unheard of. And the courses are already receiving a lot of positive attention from the student body and serve to highlight just how ready students are to not hear the same Eurocentric histories over and over again. So this is a great first step because it shows that students can and are willing to affect change, and they are indeed the best people to do that. So the conclusion is it can be proven that dismantling the racist and bigoted colonial mindset of Northern American educational systems is very possible and very necessary for the empowerment of Black, Indigenous, people of color, and education of white students. Thank you. And here's my works cited. So I'm going to do questions where you can just unmute and ask me a question. I like talking better than looking in the chat, but if you really want to, you can put them in the chat as well.
Do I have to raise my hand?
Oh yeah, sorry, I forgot to say you can raise your hand as well if you want to.
Okay. Oh, no, I'm going to get the feedback. This was very professional, and I appreciate that you were able to troubleshoot before the presentation, right? That's just fabulous, very professional. I also liked and I think it's an appropriate dig at the students being unpaid for all that work. I think that's important that people understand that. So here's my question, right? Because we've had a lot of talks about this area, and it does actually fit with your sort of religion spirituality one. Do you see yourself using either one of these courses as a small catalyst to what you might want to study in college?
I definitely do. And you're talking about the one from first semester too, right?
Yeah, the spirituality, sensuality one?
Yeah. I find both of these interesting because I think I can find a synthesis in the two wherein teaching about concepts that are not Christianity, concepts like Buddhism, Taoism, Sikhism, Hinduism, and having those commonplace in the schools, it really unites my passion for religion and self-betterment and my passion for helping others, because I think bringing these non-European ideas into school systems will help people, because it definitely has helped me. So yeah, I see myself kind of going down like a social justice path, and I think both of my Catalyst courses kind of ignited that in me, where I could see like a synthesis between bringing religion into public schools and using that as a career. Yeah, that was a really good question. Thank you. If anyone else has a question, they can just raise their hand. It's a little feature where it's like the emoji of a face with a hand in front of it.
Is it okay if I just talk? Is that fine?
You're all good, Georgia.
Okay, bestie, that was so good. I'm so hyped for you. My question for you is, well, it has just left my head, but my question for you is, if you could make one change, like if you could implement one change in any area of your high school education, whether it be at Roosevelt or at Central, what would that change be? Like being like curriculum or specific book implemented, or like what would you want to change?
So weirdly enough, in 8th grade, I took directed study with Miss Fredrigill, and it at the beginning of class every day we did like a 5-minute like Buddhist meditation, and I found it really impactful to start just have some sort of unorthodox start to the school, because like a lot of the colonizer mindset works in like the rigid, like you have to go to this class and this class and you have to take all of them, but the one change that I would make is just kind of letting them free flow and letting classes start off, if a meditation, if they want to, let them go outdoors and do classes, because I think we are moving in a good direction, like the classes that you guys created and the books that we read in English. I think the teaching materials are becoming diversified. So I would just like to see kind of a change in the pace of school, because it feels very capitalistic and colonizer-esque, because it's like you have to be productive or you're not worth anything. And so I find just like a slowing down and a recess, or like a revolution in not having that message be told is really important. But that was a good question. Thank you.
Okay, so we have a pretty good size audience, right? But most of them are students or people who don't work directly with the district. So who do you want to hear this message? Like, who would you like us to say, here, please watch this video and listen to this student? Who do you want to hear? Who do you want to have hear your message?
Well, it's kind of tough because if you trace the the power back to the legislators, they're trying to pass House Senate File 802 right now, which is not good. But I think, honestly, I would have the student body watch that presentation because with the advent of the internet, like we live in the age of information, and I think students understanding that education doesn't have to look like this series of stressing out over assignments, turning them in and not really learning anything, memorizing information that isn't applicable to their life. Like this system can change. And so I think that I would send this out to the student body so I could have students become aware of the stories that they're being fed and how that relates to how the stories that students tell themselves about themselves. So yeah, I think the student body would be very important. Yeah, Stephanie Davis.
Yes, I was just curious, what's something you learned about in your research that was just totally intriguing, but you were unable to include in your presentation today? Because I know this process includes a whole bunch of different aspects. So what's something that you didn't have the opportunity to talk about today?
Yeah, so the probably saddest part of this whole thing is that I wasn't able to talk about the Zapatistas, which is an indigenous revolution in southern Mexico. And I was looking it up in the vein of First Nation empowerment and just exactly what that can do for people when they don't have to be subjected to an oppressive colonial society. And so the Zapatistas in the 1990s took over the state of Chiapas in southern Mexico, and they still hold an autonomous region. And they did so because when Mexico signed the North American Free Trade Agreement that promised to privatize indigenous community farms, so basically it was going to take away their livelihood. And a pro-indigenous movement had been building for quite a while, and that kind of was the boiling point. And so the Zapatistas established a sovereign zone in southern Mexico, and they kind of instituted the traditional educational methods of the southern indigenous populations. And already the research is showing that they have much higher levels of engagement in the classroom and better literacy rates because students have completely undergone a revolution in the way that they are taught and the information that they're subjected to, and it's actually information about their culture and their lineage, and so that proves hugely influential to the students' lives. So I didn't get to put in the Zapatista movement because it was kind of too off track. It wasn't necessarily about education. It was about a lot of other things. But yeah, I would definitely say the Zapatistas were the one thing that I wish I could have talked about more.
And I would say, I know, did you invite them all to your blog? Because I would definitely, there's some of your posts that about the Zapatistas and different things. I think your blog was fabulous, so I would have them read that.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it was week 9, post 2 was when I talked about the Zapatistas. But yeah, I encourage everyone to look into it. It's amazing. You don't really hear about autonomous zones being established in Mexico, but it's there. But thank you. That was a good question. Does anyone else have a question? If not, thank you all for coming again. Miss Dunley, thank you for recording and everything on the technical side. And yeah, I guess just thank you again. Sorry, Miss Dunley, were you going to say something?
No, I just wanted to thank you for your presentation. Again, I really appreciate the work you've done, and I appreciate, Mary brought it up earlier, how much, even though it was a smaller group, how much our share and connect, even though you guys had totally different subjects, how fabulous you guys listened to each other, learned from each other, and made connections. So I just wanted to give you a plug on that one too.
Yeah, thank you. I really enjoyed the Share and Connects. I'm going to be sad not to do GTLS next year. Hopefully I'll find some.
We'll just invite you back. You better be somebody who comes back and is an audience member.
Oh, I will come back. Thank you for the nice comments in the chat. Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate that.
And I did fill out, I did send you all a form to fill out to send back to Isaac or I know sometimes people outside the district have trouble using the student email, so I included his Gmail on that too.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. So I'm going to stop recording.